Welcome to part two of Succeeding with ADHD. There was one last slide from part one that we want to talk about first, which continues with the adult outcomes. Adults with ADHD may be undereducated relative to their intellectual ability and family educational background. I have evaluated lots of children who, as children, were gifted and very promising, but for one reason or the other, with age, they developed less likely to be successful, worked in jobs that were seriously under their potential, and there's also some change in intellectual level as they age, particularly when there has been no treatment. These individuals tend to change their jobs more often than others, sometimes out of boredom and because of interpersonal problems in the workplace. They also have a tendency to have a greater turnover of friendships and dating relationships and seem more prone to marital discord and even divorce. Difficulties with speeding while driving are relatively commonplace, as are more traffic citations for this behavior, and in some cases, more motor vehicle accidents than others are likely to experience in their driving careers. It is not unlikely to have individuals with ADHD who have their driver's licenses suspended or revoked. Here's some general information about the subtypes of ADHD. Inattentive, where we would see significant inattentiveness without being impulsive or hyperactive. Hyperactive impulsive, have difficulties primarily with impulsive and hyperactive behavior and not with attention or concentration. Combined, these individuals manifest both clinical features, are likely to develop their hyperactive and/or impulsive symptoms first, and usually during the preschool years, but eventually progress to developing the difficulties with attention span, persistence, and distractibility within a few years of entering school. Research has shown that 80% of those diagnosed in childhood have the symptoms 10 years after diagnosis. 50 to 70% of those diagnosed in childhood continue to have symptoms late into adulthood. Here's information about the predominantly inattentive type. There's been considerably less research on predominantly inattentive type of ADHD, or what used to be referred to as ADD, or attention deficit disorder without hyperactivity. The research does suggest that there are some qualitative differences between the attention problems these individuals experience and those with other types of ADHD, in which hyperactive or impulsive behavior is present. The predominantly inattentive type of ADHD appears to be associated with more daydreaming, passivity, sluggishness, difficulty with focused or selective attention, slow processing of information, mental fogginess, confusion, social quietness or apprehensiveness, hypoactivity, and inconsistent retrieval of information from memory. It is considerably less likely to be associated with impulsivity, as well as oppositional defiant disorder, behavior, conduct problems, or delinquency. Here are some of the inattentive type symptoms taken from the DSM-5. Poor persistence toward goals or tasks. Impaired resistance to responding to distractions. Deficient task re-engagement following disruptions. So in other words, if they were working on something and something distracted them or stopped their behavior, they have much more difficulty getting back to what they were doing. Impaired working memory. Here are some of the symptoms that are most notable for inattentive types. They fail to give close attention to details, difficulty sustaining attention. They don't seem to listen. They don't seem to follow through on instructions. Difficulty organizing tasks or activities. Avoid tasks requiring sustained mental effort. Lose things necessary for tasks. Easily distracted. Forgetful in daily activities. Here are symptoms related to the hyperactivity impulsivity type. Impaired verbal and motor inhibition. In other words, can't stop talking and can't quite stop moving. Impulsive decision making. Cannot wait or defer gratification. These are the kids that opt for the quick reward. Greater disregard of future delayed consequences. Excessive task irrelevant movement and verbal behavior, such as fidgeting, squirming, running, climbing, touching. Emotionally impulsive, poor emotional self-regulation. Again, here are some of those symptoms. These are the kids that fidget with their hands or feet or squirm in their seat. These are the kids that leave their seat in class inappropriately. They run about or climb excessively. I evaluated lots of kids with ADHD, and sometimes they would climb as high as the ceiling if they had the opportunity. They have difficulty playing quietly. They're on the go or driven by a motor. Talking excessively. They blurt out answers before questions are completed. These are the kids who start a task before the teacher has given them all the instructions. They have difficulty awaiting turn, and they interrupt or intrude on others. Here are some interesting facts about ADHD. Hyperactivity, and in particular, hyperactive impulsive individuals. Hyperactivity arises early. Preschoolers are likely to be in the hyperactive impulsive type. Inattention arises 2 to 3 years later. School children are likely to be in the combined type. 90% of hyperactive impulsive type evolve into combined types. Hyperactivity declines significantly with age. By late adolescence or young adulthood, many combined types are now inattentive types. Sluggish cognitive tempo. So you remember the slide that we presented a few slides ago talking about predominantly inattentive type and not knowing quite where research falls for this group. Beginning in the 1980s, researchers began comparing attention deficit disorder ADD for those with and without hyperactivity. Generally, there were few cognitive differences, but mainly behavioral and social differences. ADD without hyperactivity involved slow and inaccurate information processing, daydreaming, staring, being easily confused, mental fogginess, hypoactivity, sluggish movement, lethargy, social withdrawal, shy, and anxious. By 2001, studies emerged that revealed sluggish cognitive tempo as a distinct disorder from ADHD combined type. By 2011, the first study of sluggish cognitive tempo in adults revealed it as a separate disorder, yet one that overlaps with ADHD in 64% of cases, mainly inattentive type. I was actually very happy to see this research because in my history of evaluating children, particularly those who were suspected of having ADHD, I would actually see these children who didn't quite fit the previous ADD diagnosis and actually had many of the symptoms that are noted here. So here are the features of sluggish cognitive tempo. Distinctly different from inattentiveness that is seen in ADHD, but can be comorbid with ADHD, mostly inattentive type. These kids rarely show aggression or ODD or oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder. These are the kids that teachers don't complain about. These are the kids that kind of sit in the classroom unnoticed. They have a greater risk of anxiety symptoms, possibly greater risk for depression, lower levels of parenting stress, greater parental concerns regarding school failure, equally impaired in educational performance. ADHD is a productivity disorder, while sluggish cognitive tempo is an accuracy disorder. So what do we mean like that about that? What that means is ADHD, individuals with ADHD, if you can get them to sit down and do the work, they'll actually do it. Sluggish cognitive tempo kids will do the work, but it's often inaccurate. While the ADHD group, if you can get them to do the work is generally accurate. Those with sluggish cognitive tempo may have a greater frequency of math disorders. There may be a greater family history of anxiety and learning disabilities. Sluggish cognitive tempo symptoms on rating scales. Here are the symptoms that would most likely lead to a diagnosis of sluggish cognitive tempo. You see them in the classroom daydreaming. They have difficulty staying alert or awake in boring situations. They're easily confused, spacey, or appear to be in a fog. Their mind seems to be elsewhere. Sometimes they just stare a lot. They're lethargic, more tired than others. They underachieve or have less energy than others, slow moving or sluggish. They don't seem to understand or process information as quickly or accurately as others. These are the kids that need a little bit of extra time to answer questions because they just don't process information as quickly. They're apathetic or withdrawn, less engaged in activities. They get lost in their own thoughts. They're slow to complete tasks, need more time than others. They lack initiative to complete work, or effort fades quickly. The old model criticized. The old model to explaining ADHD failed to explain why problems of inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity seem to occur in one condition. It also failed to explain what went wrong in the normal development of a person to produce this disorder. Instead, there was a simple checklist of specific difficulties, diagnostic criteria. Attention deficit is not specific to ADHD, is not the central problem, is not shown by people with ADHD in many situations. New findings include children show delayed internalization of speech, which we talked about previously, which is an important tool for self-control, difficulty estimating the passage of time, difficulty with solving problems due to difficulty in organizing information. That is the end of ADHD, Succeeding with ADHD, Part 2. Please tune in for Part 3.